Great, thanks, Nicole. I'm just gonna open it up here and go to presenter mode. There we go, if we can see that. Great, so I'll hand it over to Sarah to get us started.
Hi, I'm Sarah Gingrich. I'm a project lead with the Environment and Climate Division at the city. Happy to be here tonight. Everyone can hear me okay? I'd like to offer the Indigenous land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. We would also like to give an African ancestral acknowledgement. Though I am not a person of African descent, I am committed to continually acting in support of and in solidarity with Black communities seeking freedom and reparative justice in light of the history and ongoing legacy of slavery that continues to impact Black communities in Canada. As part of this commitment, I would also like to acknowledge that not all people came to these lands as migrants and settlers. Specifically, I wish to acknowledge those of us who came here involuntarily, particularly those brought to these lands as a result of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. In support of the City of Toronto's ongoing efforts to confront anti-Black racism, I pay tribute to those ancestors of African origin and descent.
Thanks, Sarah. So everyone, my name is Andrew Plunkett. I'm also a project lead in the Environment and Climate Division at the City of Toronto. So Sarah and I work on the Net Zero team, which is the team that is responsible for the TransformTO Net Zero strategy. I'll take you through the outline for tonight's webinar, and we can jump into it in a sec. First of all, a little bit about what climate change looks like. I'm sure you all already know this and are probably experiencing it in one way or another. We'll talk a bit about TransformTO, the background, goals, principles, and timelines, the path to net zero, where we're currently at, and the net zero action plan, in particular, the development of the next plan that Nicole mentioned earlier. And then we'll have some time for Q&A. So what does climate change look like in Toronto? And so I'm just going to adjust my screen a bit here so I can see a bit better. This is a picture of Toronto Island. I think it's from 2017, but this is just one example. If you were following the news this summer, seeing the DVP flooding 3 times, or if you happen to be on the DVP when it flooded, there's a lot more intense rainstorms in Toronto, more heat, hot days, hotter days, longer heat waves. And in fact, the city does collect some climate stats, some weather stats with TRCA. These are currently being updated, and the new set will actually be released fairly soon. So these are the current set, not totally out of date, but they're being updated. So for example, daily maximum temperature from 2000 to 2009, typically around 37 degrees, projected to be more like 44 degrees between 2040 and 2050. Hot days between 2000 and 2009, we had about 20 per year. Those are days above 30 degrees, projected to go up to 66. Extended heat waves from sort of like one extended heat wave every 2 years to 2.5 per year, and daily rainfall maximum from 66 milliliters to 166. So we're already seeing these changes happening again, with heat waves and severe rainstorms. And so this is something that is part of the consultation. You'll notice that in the materials. And there's a point to that because we want to acknowledge that people are experiencing these challenges. So as we work on reducing our emissions, we're also working on adapting to climate change at the same time. So a bit about the TransformTO Net Zero strategy. You might already be familiar with this, so apologies if this is already familiar to you. In 2019, Toronto City Council declared a climate emergency and directed staff to develop a strategy that would get the city community-wide to reduce emissions to net zero by 2050 or sooner. And so our team and staff across the city and stakeholders and many people worked on this strategy. It was adopted by Toronto City Council in December 2021. It has a long-term goal of net zero emissions by 2040. And so it's 10 years sooner than the previous strategy, which had a long-term goal of an 80% reduction in emissions by 2050. The interim target that Nicole referenced in the intro is a 65% reduction in emissions by 2030. And there was rationale for that as well, because when you talk about 2040 and 2050 with people, it seems very far off, and people, I mean, we all kind of put our hands and think, well, we don't need to worry about that. That's a long time from now, but we do need to worry about that. And when we set interim targets, it helps us to get on the right trajectory to reach net zero. And so 2030 is not that far away. What are net zero emissions? Basically achieved when we stop emitting GHGs, greenhouse gas emissions, from how we live, work, and travel, to get as close to zero as possible. And then we offset any remaining emissions through carbon removals or carbon credits. So what would remaining emissions be? It would be things like methane in landfills, because we can't, do anything about organic matter that's already biodegrading in the ground. It could be some industrial processes or buildings that are very difficult to convert. So there certainly will be some residual emissions, but we want to get as close to net zero as possible. What is the action plan? So this is part of the strategy, part of the long-term strategy, which goes to 2040. Well, we have 5-year action plans within that, within the net zero strategy. So the first one, we are moving into the last year of the first plan, which is 2022 to 2025. It had a set of 30 key actions in 7 sectors and a number of sub-actions. And so the next action plan that we're talking about tonight and in this consultation is 2026 to 2030, currently being developed based on technical modeling that we're conducting and internal and external consultations. So we're working with other city divisions, agencies, and corporations, with stakeholders, and through public consultation. The net zero strategy has critical steps to net zero. Key steps including carbon accountability, establishing a carbon budget, what the city has done internally, accelerate rapid and significant reduction in fossil natural gas use in buildings through programs like the Toronto Green Standard and existing building strategy, increase access to low carbon transportation, and increase local renewable energy. The net zero strategy also has a number of guiding principles. So advancing social equity and protecting low-income residents, improving affordability, good local jobs, public health, poverty reduction, resilience. So the point is that it's not just about climate, and it's not meant to unfairly burden people as we reduce emissions. So we need to also stay focused on these key principles as a core part of the strategy. And also important to acknowledge that climate has many co-benefits, climate work. And so when we are reducing emissions, we're also looking at creating good local jobs and investing in the local economy, improving affordability, having healthier air and healthier residents, and enhancing natural space, for example. So all of these things are very interrelated. These actions don't take place in a vacuum. They're all meant to support other actions that the city is pursuing. Just a quick glance at some of the existing programs that are ongoing within the net zero strategy and the current action plan. In buildings, we have things like the Better Buildings Partnership for large buildings, and the Green Will Initiative, Better Homes for homeowners, Eco-Roof Incentive Program, Home Energy Loan Program, retrofit loans, Toronto Green Standard for new buildings, Solar TO program. In transportation, Cycling Network Plan, Bike Share, Rapid TO, transit service improvements, EV strategy and public EV charging. There's EV incentives. The city's greening the fleet, both the city fleet and the TTC bus fleet. For waste, there's a number of waste management programs, including the long-term waste management strategy, and community and environment days for reducing waste and renewable natural gas programs at one of our landfills and waste transfer stations. And also a number of programs on getting involved. The Climate Action Champions program, Live Green Volunteers, a lot of information on the Live Green website on how people can get involved in climate in their day-to-day lives, either through volunteering or just through the things that they might want to do in their personal life. Um, the path to net zero, where we're currently at. So this is obviously really important. Part of the strategy, we need to know sort of where we're at and how we're orienting ourselves to the 2030 target. There's a few different reports on the website that you could look up on this. Our most recent progress and accountability report was released in March. The sector-based emissions inventory is completed annually. This is the 2021 inventory, which is the most recent, but the 2022 inventory is going to be released very soon. The reason why it's 2021 and 2022 is essentially it takes 2 years to put the inventory together for a variety of reasons. It's very data intensive, and we get emissions factors from the government to do the calculations. So it's quite an involved process, and the new inventory will be released, I think, in the next few weeks. There's also a consumption-based emissions inventory, not something we're going to focus on tonight, but that is emissions, that refers to emissions in the supply chain, things that are generated, outside of the city, but used within the city. So something that we want to continue to strengthen our work on. So quick look at our emissions profile. Three key sectors in our emissions inventory: buildings, transportation, and waste. Buildings make up the largest portion, about 56% in the most recent inventory. Transportation is the second most at 35%, and waste at 9%. And so based on this, you'll see in the consultation that we are focusing quite heavily on the first two, because they make up 91% of our emissions, and we really need to tackle these two sources. More specifically, where these, oh, sorry, I'll get to that in a sec. I'll talk a bit about like within each sector where these emissions come from. And I just have to adjust my screen a bit so I can see this graph a bit better. This is our path to net zero over time, and from our 1990 baseline. So from 25 megatons of emissions, we're down pretty significantly, down at about 14.5 megatons currently. And you'll see our targets superimposed over this graph. So we've already met and exceeded our 2020 target, which is good. But you'll notice the 2025 target is sitting right there, and we do need to continue to reduce emissions to reach that target. There was a drop in emissions in 2020, and you can probably guess why that was, with the lockdowns and people not driving very much. Transportation emissions were reduced pretty significantly in 2020. We did see a bump back up in 2021 of about 4%. We anticipate likely another increase in 2022. And so we do need to get back down on that downward trajectory to meet our 2025, 30, and 2040 goals, which is why we're talking to you tonight and consulting on the next action plan. And then just specifically in terms of like sources, natural gas obviously is the biggest single source, and since buildings are 56% of overall emissions, natural gas is a very significant source through home heating, and gasoline and diesel fuel through transportation. 70% of transportation emissions are from personal vehicles, the remainder through commercial vehicles and transit vehicles. So those are the really important emission sources to tackle. 9% through waste, so that again, that's like typically methane coming from landfills. So that's where we're at the moment. So we're here to talk to you tonight specifically about the next action plan, and I'll tell you a bit about the consultation process and ways that you can provide input. Nicole mentioned this at the outset. We're talking a bit about weather as well, because I don't know, to me, it's kind of like the elephant in the room, right? You can't talk about climate without talking a little bit about the things we're seeing on a day-to-day, on a regular basis, right? the DVP flooding, I think it was 3 times this summer through severe rainstorms, a lot of hot days, and we want to know a bit more from people in the city on how this is impacting them. So you'll see those questions in the consultation, and it's also a good sort of introduction to also talking about emissions. So we're asking people like, how is the hotter, wetter, and wilder weather impacting you? But we're also talking about what we can do about it, and getting on that steeper trajectory to reduce emissions and meet our goals. And so I mentioned the key emissions sources. So heating, single-family homes, number one, gasoline and diesel fuel, number two. And so you'll also notice this in the consultation, some questions specifically about if you own a home, for example, how you heat it and and any plans you might have for the home. If you own a car, what kind of car or how you get around. But if you don't, because we know many people in the city don't own their own homes, and maybe many people actually don't own cars as well, are there other things they can do? And of course, there's things for everyone to do. And so we feel like using your voice and advocating is also a really significant action. And you'll see that reflected in the consultation as well. So having discussions, for example, if you're a tenant, advocating with your landlord or someone at work or your boss, just talking to people about climate and the things that we all can do. So the consultation process, we have conducted 3 previous citywide consultations on this in the development of the original TransformTO, and then when we developed the net zero strategy in 2020 and 2021. And so we have a pretty good idea of the actions that will go into the action plan. We do an extensive amount of internal consultation with other divisions. So this would be divisions like transportation services and city planning and solid waste and parks and several other divisions, and also agencies like the TTC, corporations like Toronto Hydro. So there's a lot of work internally on this. We look at jurisdictional scans, what other cities are doing, what are best practices, what innovative things are happening around the world that we might be able to adapt and use here in Toronto. And we're also doing technical modeling. And basically the modeling is meant to take a real data-driven approach to find the best pathways to net zero emissions and the most cost-effective pathways to net zero emissions. So the latest round of technical modeling will be delivered to us fairly soon. And so that's a really significant input along with information from internal and external stakeholders and the public. So the process is focused on ways to mobilize around the key emission sources by answering the following questions. Essentially, what actions are people taking? What actions would they like to take? What barriers and challenges are they facing? And what supports could they use to overcome these barriers and challenges? Again, trying to unlock that 91% of emissions through home heating and through transportation for the most part. I mean, there's many other things as well, but obviously these are the 2 most significant things we really need to tackle. We have a website set up for this, toronto.ca// net zero action plan. So you'll find all of the information there, and different ways to get involved. As Nicole said, there's an online survey. There's webinars, which is what we're doing right now. We have another one next week. We have a group discussion guide on the website, so you can download that, host a discussion. A group discussion can be anything. It can be 2 people, it could be 200 people, it can be an organization, it could be neighbors or friends or family members. Anyone who wants to just talk about what they're doing and what challenges they're facing and what kind of supports they could use to keep taking action on climate. And we're also doing a number of pop-up events across the city. Nicole mentioned that. We were at the Royal Winter Fair last week. We're at the Scarborough Town Center last night. Those are found on the website, and we'll keep updating that list as we add more events. We're going to a number of community centers this month, right through the end of January. And again, everything found on the website. We've extended the deadline at the request of some groups who wanted to have and set up some discussions. So we've extended the deadline to the end of January. So there's plenty of time to do it. But if you're interested in doing the survey or hosting a discussion, we hope you can get going on that soon. Just a quick look at the timelines. So the top of this chart shows the internal engagement that I've referenced. So that's speaking with divisions, agencies, and corporations, and the modeling process. And then the bottom half is the external engagement that we're doing. So we have a climate advisory group that advises the city, meets quarterly with a number of a very diverse group of experts, and they meet regularly and provide advice on our programming. And currently, we are in the public consultation phase as well. You'll see there, and both of these external engagements will feed into the action plan development, and the action plan will be going to committee and council. So that's the Infrastructure and Environment Committee and Council in Q2 of next year, so May and June of 2025. And that's it for me. I'm going to hand it back over to Nicole, and there might be questions of clarification, and then we can also get into the questions that we'll put up on the screen as well. So thank you.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Maybe you can drop the slide sharing just for now. And if we need to pull it back up, we can.
Sure.
Awesome. So I guess it's really over to you guys to say, first of all, do you have any questions for the city based on the presentation or other sort of topics relevant to reducing emissions and meeting climate change goals? And then honest, great. Rick can jump in. And then if you don't have any questions for the city, we're also interested in sort of what the impacts of the weather changes are, if you're doing anything about it, and also what you may or may not be doing related to reducing emissions. But Rick, jump in. Go ahead.
I was wondering if TransformTO had adjusted its goals to accommodate the growth, the urban development that's supposed to be happening by 2030. Mount Dennis is one of the transit hubs. We're going from a residential community of 17,000, just over 17,000 to over 40. We've got what we thought was a relatively moderate scale of intensification has turned into boomtown as far as developers are concerned. And I just, quite frankly, don't know how that amount of construction is going to be damaging the environment, because I don't see a lot of pickup on lead platinum in the construction. I don't see a lot of pickup on our pointing at the battery, the electric battery that we got put into the neighborhood by the previous government. It seems like it's just we're going to build all of these buildings and somehow life will go on. And the reality to us is we've been trying to get climate action and eco-consciousness built into urban development. We've got eco-neighborhood as one of the objectives in the city plan. And it's just like, how do you get the development community who doesn't want to even talk about rental, let alone affordable rental, let alone rental for people that really need it, like half of the community that lives in Mount Dennis, right? So I'm struggling with how urban development is going to be affecting our predictions and our models and our action plans.
Sure, I can
Great question.
guide, and Sarah, if I leave anything out, feel free to jump in. But the short answer is like we can't, like, net zero is absolute. So it accounts for population growth. Our modeling accounts for population growth, but we don't really get any sort of credit for that, right? We're working with getting to net zero no matter what the population is. And so it is a challenge, right? It's a challenge in a growing city to reduce emissions as you're growing. It's difficult. And so for new builds, probably the strongest policy mechanism is the Toronto Green Standard, but the stricter sort of levels of the green standard won't kick in for a few more years. So you might not be seeing LEED Platinum, for example, because it's not really required yet, right? So the TGS has been around for a while now, and it's sort of advanced through a number of different tiers. And I think basically, sorry, I don't want to misspeak, but I think it's by around 2030 that the strictest tier of TGS will be in place. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a really significant challenge with new builds, and also with converting existing buildings, right? And making them more efficient, and also fuel switching on them. So I probably don't really have a very good answer for you other than to say I acknowledge the exactly what you're saying, right? In a growing city, it's a challenge to reduce emissions when you have more cars on the road and more buildings and more people, and you're trying to reduce emissions from all of that. So we need to be more efficient with every building and every vehicle, and the carbon footprint of every person.
Thank you.
Yes.
Well, just following up from Rick's excellent question, why not look into at least a recommendation from this exercise of renewing, reinforcing, reevaluating, upgrading the Toronto Green Standards? Like Rick, I'm follow development very avidly, and nobody talks about this stuff. Developer, like if you dig deeply, you can check and see what level they were submitting at, through the site plan, but it's really not a matter that's discussed with any importance. So we need, at the same time, I mean, the bigger empowerment here now is that climate, it wasn't an issue in the election south of us, right? I mean, we're into a really a period of discounting a lot of this stuff, axe the tax and so on, right? This is on the downside politically. So how do we make this important again?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I'll take that again, and feel free to jump in, anyone. But totally agree with you. Like, I'm surprised at how it's sort of fallen off the radar in the political realm, and you did like. I think the pandemic and affordability might have had something to do with that, but certainly it's probably not as high a priority as it was maybe even pre-pandemic, for example. And yeah, you're right. I didn't hear a lot of climate talk in the election recently, so that's a big challenge for us. And just to speak specifically to the TGS. They are doing a review of it currently. TGS is a policy that largely sits in city planning, so I don't want to speak too much about it because it's not my file, but we do have some folks in our division who work with city planning on it. They are doing an internal and external review. They're doing some stakeholder engagement on that. And the new version of TGS is going to, or the update, it's not, I don't know if it's really a new version, but an update to TGS will go to council sometime in 2025. I think it's sooner than later. Sorry, I forget the timing on that. So that is in the works. How much it'll change, I don't know, because there's a lot of significant stakeholder engagement that they do with large like building stakeholders, because typically it's focused on really large multi-unit residential and buildings, for example. So yeah, that process is underway. I'm not sure about the public comment period on that. So we don't work on that directly, but it does sort of feed into our work. But I agree with you. I like we do need to sort of keep advancing all of these things that we're working on, all of these levers that we have at our disposal. So that's type of feedback we're looking for, in this as well. So please feel free to tell us that as you're, filling out your survey or reaching out to us.
I'm going to go to Elizabeth, but I also want to say I appreciate that those were questions, but for those of you who are in meetings with us, you'll know that I'll always encourage you to turn your question into a piece of advice to the city. So if there is something bold that you were expecting or that you think needs to be considered in this next action plan, then I would encourage you to translate your question into what you think that bold thing might be. So let me go to Elizabeth. You're muted, Elizabeth, otherwise we can't hear you.
Thank you.
No
I
problem.
come from a grassroots perspective. I am the 3R ambassador for my condo buildings, and I'm a sewing fixer at Repair Cafe Toronto.
Great.
And I'm also interested, well, I get a number of emails from the city just to keep informed about TransformTO, etc. And so I'm interested in knowing how you reach out to condos to ensure that they are working towards more greening of their buildings. For instance, I understand, I'm not on our condo board, but I do understand something about the reserve fund study that we just did does not kind of allow in the constitution that surrounds it for greening of our energy sources and whatnot. And I wonder how that works with the provincial regulations and whatnot. That's one thing. And I mean, are we eligible for green roof things? I don't think my building has the necessary square foot to do anything like that, but we do have one waterfall wall that could probably be a green roof to, or solar source of energy to run the waterfall. And I don't know how the board gets communication from TransformTO to encourage things like that. Not sure it's even in their mindset. I think all buildings are supposed to tell about their emissions. I asked one board member whether they're doing that. He referred it to the property managers, and of course, I haven't heard a word back on that, whether they do it or don't do it. I also want to, I'm involved with York Key Neighborhood Association and Bostra, and through as their delegate. And I'm wondering about the current Toronto Port Authority plans, Ports Toronto now, plans for hopefully expanding things at the airport and how that works into the Toronto TransformTO thing, because it's between the city and the federal government and the airport and Ports Toronto. So really it's between the city and the federal government. And how does that, help our environment? Is that a lot to digest?
I took some notes. You want to go backwards, Andrew? Maybe start with the last one. It's just like Ports Toronto thinking about expanding the airport. That's a relationship between the city with the tripartite agreement and the feds. How does the city think about that initiative in the context of TransformTO?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm fairly certain that the emissions from the island airport are included in the inventory, but I don't know exactly how that works because those are in-boundary emissions, right? But most of the emissions from a flight would be outside of the city, right? Like as soon as the plane leaves. But I believe there's some aviation emissions, and I think it's entirely from, if I'm not mistaken, from the island airport. So yeah, I imagine that that would be a challenge. It's not something, unfortunately, I know a lot about. I think it's a good question. If we're expanding, if we're expanding the airport, it, would put some pressure on our emissions reduction. I believe globally, aviation emissions are about 3% overall of global emissions. I could be wrong with that, but it's not insignificant, but it's not a huge chunk. But certainly something to think about, right? And to keep to work on like all the other parts of our emissions because it all adds up. But unfortunately, I probably don't have a very good answer for you because I don't know too much about the airport expansion, other than to say I do believe that emissions at the airport are included in our inventory. And so it would be definitely instructive to keep an eye on that and to see how they, how they change over time if the airport does expand.
Well,
Um,
actually, so I'm, it's the number of flights that are expanding,
mhm,
not the airport itself, kind of.
Right. Yeah.
It would be the number of flights that they're hoping to expand to. They
Right.
have to do runway safety zoning right now, and that's before the city councilors. They're hoping for an extension on the airport property use to govern, to pay for that kind of thing. But in turn, they have bigger plans to be able to increase the number of flights.
Right.
So
I'm going
the
to just go
number,
to your,
yeah.
sorry, Elizabeth, I'm
So-
going to jump in because your other 2 points, I don't want to spend too long on the airport because I think your other point was about how can or does the city connect with condo boards for the opportunities to sort of promote the kinds of opportunities that otherwise a condo board member may not know about related to the condo being reducing its emissions, for example, and sort of how that works, how it uses a reserve fund, how it makes a plan for that kind of stuff. So um, Andrew, I don't know if you have something in particular that TransformTO has been doing. Maybe jump in.
Sure. Yeah, I can speak to that. And on the airport thing, we can also get back to you, Elizabeth. So we'll make a note of that. If there's any useful information, we can send it to you via email. So we'll make a note of that. And we'll try and follow up as much as we can. For condos, the key intersection with the city is called the Better Buildings Partnership. And so if you might be familiar with this, but if you go onto the website, like there's a number of resources for building owners. And we have a couple of teams in our division who work on buildings. So there's like a new developments team that's more focused on the Toronto Green Standard and new builds. And our existing buildings team, which oversees the Better Buildings Partnership and works with large landlords and condo owners on energy efficiency and fuel switching. And there's also a number of programs under that umbrella. So there's retrofit loan program, there's the high-rise retrofit support program, Eco Roof. You mentioned the Green Roof program. So there are Eco Roof incentives if a building qualifies. But your specific question, I think, was like how we engage with those folks, and it is voluntary, right? There's no mechanism at the moment, to mandate a building to make any of these improvements. But the city, is looking at emissions performance standards like down the road, and big buildings would be the first place to implement something like that. But we don't have anything at the moment, that compels a building owner to make those improvements. But you could, in speaking to your board, or building manager, anyone, like you could direct them to the Better Buildings Partnership. There's a number of, and we'll send you the link. There's a number of resources online. But ultimately it's up to the building owner or the board to decide if they want to, pursue any of these. But there are some resources that might be useful, like loan programs, for example, or incentives.
I see in the chat, excuse me, Rick, looking for staffers for the Green Standard. So is that something maybe we can share after the meeting? There's somebody
Yeah.
maybe named Fernando that works there.
Yeah, for sure. Fernando has moved on, but we do have staff in our new developments team, and we can put them in touch with you. We'll find
Good.
we'll
And then
find out.
also, okay, cool. Also in the chat, can the city speed up full implementation of TGS, the Toronto Green Standard for new builds? What would it take to speed it up?
Yeah, good question. I'm sorry. I wish I could speak to that more directly. We would need someone from the new developments team to really speak to that. But like I was saying a minute ago, they're currently doing an update to TGS. So they're meeting with key stakeholders on that, meeting with building owners and developers. There's always, I think, safe to say some pushback on the TGS, right? Building owners are might be concerned with costs, for example, and moving too quickly, and the city's trying to, advance it as much as possible. I'm not privy to those. I'm not part of that work. But I do understand, people's frustrations that it's not, that it's not moving maybe quickly enough, and we should be building net zero buildings, more quickly. So, yeah, I don't really have a very specific answer to that. But I could, I can follow up with our team and and get a bit of information, for example, on what the key barriers are, or at least what the current process is. So they're in the middle of it right now, doing stakeholder engagement, and the update to TGS will be going to council. I think it's in Q1 or Q2 of 2025. If there's any
Okay, so then there's
opportunities
a
to get
couple.
involved in that, I'll try and share it. I'm not really sure what that is.
Good. I just want to, there's a couple more related to the province.
Mhm.
So one's from Irina and one's from Aster. How is the province's determination to rip out all of our bike lanes going to affect our ability to reach net zero? And then, I mean, while we're on with the province, is it possible to talk to the province about tax incentives for those who are willing to turn to green vehicles or upgrade their heating systems to be more eco-friendly? So it's a couple province questions.
Yeah, good questions. I mean, ripping out the bike lanes would not be helpful. Obviously, I don't think any of us would think that would be helpful. To me personally, it would be very frustrating. A lot of work goes into that of trying, you know, the one of our TransformTO goals is a mode shift goal, right? To get people out of single occupancy gas burning vehicles, either onto transit, onto walking or biking. And the way you do that is providing alternatives, right? Providing better transit, providing bike lanes, providing walkable neighborhoods. And so removing bike lanes is just completely counterproductive to me. I don't see how it solves anything really. And I don't even think it'll solve congestion, frankly, because it just encourages more people to drive. So I don't think it's a good idea. The city will be pushing back on that, I'm sure you can imagine, through the mayor's office largely. I think again, not something that we work on directly, but it's certainly a part of the strategy. The Transportation Services Division has spent years working on the cycling network plan. It's not easy to get a bike lane onto any street, in particular a main arterial. There's a lot of consultation, a lot of design work that goes into it. Really frustrating to see this stuff popping up in the news now. So I really hope it doesn't come to pass. I guess we'll see how the diplomacy goes between the city and the province.
Can I just say something? I think it's really so much of getting to net zero is about changing our mindset in terms of our daily habits, how we get places, what we do, and so on. And when we have a whole level of government that seems to insist on sticking with the old traditional car-dominated cities, it's I mean, I'm someone who feels very committed to, reducing my carbon footprint, but I know people who aren't, terribly committed. And then when you've got a whole level of government doing this, I think it's very discouraging and makes people feel helpless and like, why bother do anything? Um, so it's just very frustrating that just tonight the headlines were coming out about how it's going to cost over $400 million, like even twice as much to rip out the bike lanes as it would, and I know so many people who started biking when those new lanes went in and who are going to work every day using those lanes and who count on that. And I haven't started cycling because still over the years I had very bad experiences with cars just being angry they have to share the road with cyclists. So I'm still waiting for the bike lanes to get better. And here we have this huge policy thing that's basically a culture war that is telling us we can't have the city that we envision for ourselves. So I think it's a real. I don't know. I don't know how you get people involved or how you mobilize that to get people more committed and more willing to work harder, to
It's a barrier, clearly. It's a barrier to getting people more committed. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Very,
Um,
very frustrating, and to agree with everything you're saying. And I don't know what to say. I hope it doesn't come to pass. I guess we'll see how the diplomacy goes between the city and the province. It's largely could be out of our control, obviously, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's just not useful for getting people to switch their mode, obviously, which is what we're trying to do.
Would you be able
Andrew,
to
do you-
quantify in the modeling how that would interfere with the city's ability to get to net zero?
It's actually something we're working on at the moment. And I don't know if we'll have those results in time for all of this. That's the problem. But we're actually working with Toronto Metropolitan University as well on a project on cycling and emissions, because we do want better data on this. So we can ballpark it. We know that obviously riding your bike is zero emissions compared to a car. But there are a lot of factors that go into it in terms of like how many people you're converting, how long the lane is, and if you're just pushing cars to other routes, for example. So we're trying to take a real data-driven approach to it, but unfortunately, we won't have results. We're probably not going to have results on that in time for what's happening.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew, should I show the video that we have? I realize it wasn't part of the deck, but we did show it last week
Yeah.
on the emissions generated. So let me just share my screen. We're trying to do something to get. Oh, you can't hear that. Let me just make this full screen and then you guys can see it. Hang on. It's something we're trying to get a little creative because we learned from the climate advisory group, like we need to do something that is creative. And so we had a slide last week, but it looks like it didn't make it into this one. But let me show you.
While you're pulling it up, Nicole. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
That's all right. Can you see the can you see it?
Yep.
And Matthew is probably going to share the sound, right? Or do I have to do something?
It should share the sound. If not, we can try again. It's just
Okay.
when you click share, it should, yeah. Yeah, go
Okay,
ahead.
let's try it.
No, I can't hear anything. 1 second.
Well, I mean, we can speak to it even though we can't hear the sound, but it's essentially a simulation. You'll see on the left cars, and on the top right people walking and biking, and then the bottom are the emissions represented from those actions. So you see obviously significant emissions reductions from people walking and biking. And this is exactly what we're trying to capture in behavior that we're trying to encourage. Aside from all the obviously other co-benefits like congestion, affordability, there's many benefits to promoting walking and cycling, health benefits as well. So yeah.
So there's a voiceover that did not come through, obviously, but we're trying to use it to illustrate to people that if you walk more and take your bike 1 day a week, then the emissions, like everybody has a role to play. So I just thought I'd jump in on that. Okay, Jeff, you've had your hand up. Sorry about that.
So I was just going to quickly speak to the second part of, I think it was Arena's question, which was to the rebates. And again, yeah, EV rebates at the level would be very helpful. They have them in BC, they have them in Quebec. I think they're a great incentive, and again, out of our control. But I do hope that at some point the provincial government reinstitutes a provincial rebate for EVs that matches the federal rebate, because I think it's great to encourage people to electrify their cars.
So we'll go to Jeff next, and I see another question from Rick about what can the city do to pressure Metrolinx to electrify, but let's go to that after. Jeff.
I used to forget what the question was, but I did have a comment back from the Toronto Island Airport thing. I was part of that RISA discussion, and what I recalled was the RISA option 1 was all about safety. It wasn't anything about increasing the activity at the airport. In fact, as we all know, Porter is mostly gone to the Toronto airport. And the traffic at the Island Airport has in fact declined. So I think I can check that out, but that's certainly my understanding.
Right. Okay, so we've got Rick and Andrew, do you guys have a role in the relationship between the city and Metrolinx? Saying here that the Up Express, for example, on the Kitchener corridor was supposed to be electric in 2017.
Right. We don't directly. The couple of divisions in the city do, so that's the Transit Expansion Office and Transportation Services work directly with Metrolinx. I I live on the route as well, so I remember those promises. And I don't know what is happening on that, but it obviously would make good sense for them to electrify, remove those diesel emissions from our community. So something we could follow up on. I can't remember what the timeline was, but I think it was not that far off, right? And that's why people at the time were saying, why are you even doing diesel trains when you're just going to turn around and electrify them? But maybe they I'm not sure. Maybe they weren't planning on doing it as soon as they said. I don't know. So the city does do some
I could fill in on that.
admin. Sorry.
It was during the Pan Am that
Right.
Up Express was brought in as the Pan Am project, transportation project. And the community along the rail line made the case that you're using diesel trains for a modern transportation system. And can we not recognize that diesel exhaust creates cancer? And we demonstrated along the line that this was going to have an impact, given the number of people that were respiratory or could be respiratory affected by it. Much like you get along the 401, it's a higher cancer rate. So what Metrolinx did was they said, oh, well, we've ordered something that can be converted, number one. So Rob Pritchard gave us a convertible that's never been converted. Number two, they said, oh, this is the clean diesel. Well, there isn't anything that's really clean diesel. But they continued to use that idea of we can build T3 diesel into Tier 3 diesel into our regional expansion. And then number three was they said, oh, well, we're going to go to produce a different kind of fuel for our train. And then they found out that they couldn't transport it after they produced it by the nuclear plant. So it's just been one reason after another for not doing it. And most recently, they'll probably kick back of, oh, the residents don't want it because it means all of this ground electricity would be shocking them. So I'm sorry, it's a major agency problem of not doing what civics would say is smart planning. They huddle and decide what they're going to do. We were called NIMBYs by the latest Minister of Transportation, and we've spent 20 years trying to improve the transportation system in Mount Dennis.
Yeah, it's frustrating. I
sure
can say
have.
that we're electrifying the TTC bus fleet, which is something under the city's control, and that will be the last. That will be the remainder of diesel for the TTC. Obviously, the subway and the streetcars are already electrified, so that is meant to be completed.
Sorry, I'll try to contain myself on this stuff, but the city is involved in funding some of the GO track improvements. The city is involved in paying for Metrolinx's LRT program. There's an equal, or not an equal, but a share of funding that goes into that. So within the agreements, we're junior partner, the city's junior partner, but it should be around the decision-making table. And right now, the problem is that the regimes around the decision-making table, that was a Rob Pritchard, right? Well, he's so far in the past of Metrolinx that they don't know who he is. We gotta bring that stuff forward somehow. And I would say if it was related to climate is let's bring, you know, a modern transportation forward that they've been using in Europe and been able to build in California in 5 years, not 15 or 20. Why can't we press one level of government, press another, based on the need to include it as a transportation transformation?
I'm
Yeah, fair enough.
aware
And
of the time, and
I was just gonna say, we'll
sorry.
pass that on. I think that's a good point, and we can sort of raise that internally here. But yeah, thank you for that.
No, I think, and I mean, all of this is going to get reported back to council, right? Like the results of the consultation. So to say, like, hey, I mean, internally get your priorities straight, and then externally use the power that you do have. Like, it's because of the climate advisory group that of the 3 actions, because 91% of those actions you heard Andrew say are like heat pump at home, don't drive a fuel vehicle. But the climate advisory group said you must put that use your voice category for exactly the kind of thing you're talking about, because, and it's unusual to have a city agency, you know, include an advocacy component for in a consultation like this. So I think it's going to be well received by the CAG and others, this kind of feedback. But I just wanted to say, Elizabeth mentioned about changing the electoral system. And then we have a few other suggestions in the chat, which we'll make sure that we grab. Jeff, you have a final comment, and then Andrew, I'm going to turn it to you to wrap up.
Yes, it's a bit related. It seems to me that my question, I guess, is Vision Zero kind of monitoring the city's agenda? I think of a lot of the changes as an observer and participant seem to be directed at reducing costs for, like in terms of planning, which is development, which I'm involved in. It's about reducing costs for developers. You know, the rear angular plane discussion right now around mid-rise, towers and so on. It's all about reducing, making it easier to build, making it simpler, dumbing it down in a sense. And no discussion about whether this will actually be climate friendly. And a good example is the parking minimums have been reduced dramatically. And it's all about saving, you know, they don't have to provide the parking for the condo builders. And therefore save, you know, a layer of deep digging and reduce costs for construction. And somebody was saying, well, it's great, they're providing all this bike parking, you know, hundreds and hundreds of bike parking stalls, but no car parking. So in one sense, it looks, you know, wonderful. Of course, the neighbors are saying, where people are still going to have cars, where are they going to park them? You know, on my street. You know, I'm just wondering, in an example like that, where was the climate consideration? Was it examined from a climate perspective? You know, like, is climate being used as a lens on every policy decision, particularly where it impacts on the physical environment, like planning and buildings department, you know, those kind of things. You know, are you involved in that? That is the big thing. You should be involved. Should be a requirement for a climate lens to be applied on all these new initiatives.
Yeah, it's a great point, Jeff. And we have an internal climate lens that we're working on and carbon budget. So this is for internal processes, divisional priorities. But it's not something that is necessarily applied to, you know, community-wide projects, but something that hopefully is a good example, and that we could begin to like expand outside of the city. So, you know, eventually having like a community-wide carbon budget, for example, rather than just a corporate carbon budget. So it's a great suggestion. I don't know if I probably don't have a really good answer for that, but I think that you know, having climate considerations incorporated into important decision making, and development and transportation is very important. But specifically to the buildings, I'm not sure. I could definitely see the benefits that you're talking about. So for example, reducing parking, encouraging bike cycling is great. But then there's also potential negative impacts of, parking spilling over or whatnot, or not having EV parking, for example, or EV charging. So, yeah, it's a good example of something that we can follow up on with our buildings teams. From the TGS perspective or the EXB strategy, climate is very central to those. But not being on the buildings teams, I don't think I can answer specifically.
Okay, so this is the kind of conversation we wanted to have. We wanted to make it short and sweet, like a presentation in an hour. And we have a few follow-up items to get to you, and we'll also pull everything from the chat. And when we send out the notes, we'll make sure we include there the link to the Better Building Partnership information as one of the things we were going to do. And maybe Rick will just email you directly with the TGS staff if the folks have changed. And
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything else other than if you want to come back, or other people, like next week would be the next opportunity. I think the overriding message about being aware of and bringing the climate lens to so many of the things the city does, that's coming through loud and clear, and maybe that you don't see it everywhere, and encouraging. I mean, the city needs that outside push a lot of the time. So, Andrew, last word over to you, and we'll get ready again for next week.
Great, thanks. Well, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us, taking time out of your busy days to discuss with us. Again, please visit the website when you have a sec. Please complete a survey. Consider having a discussion in your community or with your group if you think that would be of value and of interest to you. We'll also be out and about throughout the city, so you'll find some of the places will be on the website if you'd like to come and speak to us in person at some point. But otherwise, again, just thank you. Really appreciate you joining us tonight. Lots of great questions. And if you have additional questions, please put them in your survey response or email us at transform@toronto.ca.
Nice to see some familiar faces. Our city works because of people like you. You know that, right? I guarantee you.
100%.
Anyways.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
Everybody.
Good night.